Welcome back to the Engineered Angler. My name is Franco. I'm a professional engineer, a lure maker, and lure designer, and an avid fisherman. And this week we're going to work a little bit on clear coats. Every one of those lures has a clear coat on them. Most of those have been clear coated with UV Cure resin. That's an epoxy that actually sets when it's exposed to UV light, whether it's sunshine or a UV light from a light bulb. That means to set that UV resin, you have to have some UV lights. And that's what those things are in there. I have my lights inside a turner that allows me to turn lures so that the coating stays nice and even on the surface of the lure throughout the process of setting. Now, I'm not going to get super technical about UV resin, but I do want to cover general guidelines on how to use it and what problems I've been finding and some of you guys have been finding from the emails I'm getting from you guys and how I've solved them so far. And I also want to experiment a little bit on this video with some two-part epoxy resin. This stuff is meant for sort of deep and shallow pours, the kind of stuff people use on tabletops and deep castings where folks might cast sort of a cube of clear resin around some curio or something. So this stuff is supposedly good for anything from a thin coating to a thick pour. And that made me curious whether this was something viable, because a lot of folks don't want to deal with having a bunch of UV lights. It takes up some room, and it does mean you have to invest a little bit on lights, a power supply, and if you don't have a turner, you're probably going to need one anyway, especially if you're using two-part epoxy, because this stuff sets slowly. And that's one of the reasons I ended up going with UV resins. Now, when you turn the lights on, it only takes a minute or two to get an initial set on the clear coat on your lures. Now, they're still not completely set. You'll still have to let them go for a while. And how long depends on the power of your light and how close you have that light to your lure. It can also vary with the thickness of the layer of resin you put on the lure and on the size of the lure and how many lures you actually have in your chamber. All those things can contribute to a longer set time for your clear coat. And one of the problems I've had, and a lot of you guys have told me you've had, is that you end up pulling your lure out and it ends up being a little bit tacky. Now this one is not. This is a nice, hard, well set clear coat. That stickiness is actually a little bit of residue. And what happens is if you don't get a full set, just the outside sets and is actually typically pretty hard to the touch. But with a little time, the surface becomes sticky since the entire thickness of the layer of clear coat isn't fully set. Now that's one problem, basically having it sticky right out of the chamber. But there's also another problem that you'll find is that after time, just with this thing sitting in the tackle box, it will become a little tacky and start to collect dust. But that's actually less serious and easier to solve because that's just the resin still having a little bit of unset material deep inside, and it begins to sort of come to the surface, and it's easy just to clean off. You can just use soap and water or wipe it down with some alcohol, and that usually solves the problem. And you probably won't have to do that more than once or twice during the life of the lure. But the really serious one, where it just doesn't seem to want to set even after an hour or 2 hours in the chamber, that's the most frustrating one and the one that takes a little more effort to solve. And it was happening to me about 6 months ago. I thought it was the actual resin itself because I hadn't changed anything with my setup, but it turned out it was my setup. And typically that's my answer to anyone who asks me, hey, I'm having this problem, it's not setting. Typically it's these three things. One, you don't have enough wattage, enough power in your UV light setup. Two, you don't have the lure close enough to the lights because the energy of the light goes down exponentially as you move away from it. So even though it seems like your lure is close, if it isn't as close as you can get it, you're not getting the most out of the lights you paid for. And the third and most important is the UV light wavelength. What's the wavelength of the light? Where does it fall in the spectrum? So UV light starts at about around 400 nanometers in wavelength. And as the UV gets more and more away from the visible light spectrum and more energetic, it gets shorter and shorter. So I recommend the maximum wavelength of 390. The best range is somewhere between 360 and 380, but no more than 390. These lights are 385 and they do pretty well. They're 9 watts each and I've got 8 of them in that little chamber, which isn't a lot of wattage, but I've got the surface of the interior of this thing covered in reflective tape so that light bounces around in there pretty well, and the lures pass pretty close to the lights themselves. They come within an inch, and sometimes so close that I've got to be careful not to have them hit.
So let's get back to the problem of the UV resin not setting completely.
So how did I actually solve the problem? Well, I followed my own advice. Every time someone asks me about these kind of issues, my pat response is make sure your light setup is perfect. And 99% of the time I'm right, and I was right again. Now, I was really doubtful about the lights because I hadn't changed anything. Well, that's the key. I hadn't changed anything. So I changed the bulbs. And if you take a look at these, you can see that they're sort of dull and they're dirty compared to a nice crisp new one. So the thing to note is that even if you had the right bulb to begin with, they can go bad or they can just get weak with time. Even if they don't go out, with time the UV energy goes down and they start to be less and less effective in curing the resin. So I changed my bulbs and it solved my problem. What I plan to do is use these 3 lures that I made a while back. These are 3 suspending crankbaits, and if you want to see how I made it, I'll put a link up here somewhere. And the only thing I've done to them is give them a little bit of a sanding and just a light coating of automotive primer. So my plan is to treat them each just a little differently, just to see how the 2-part epoxy reacts with the surfaces. This one I'll just leave the way it is and coat it with the epoxy. The next 2 I'll do a little differently because typically when I put a clear coat on a lure, it's on top of paint. And I like to seal the paint before I put the clear coat on it. I find that using a mid coat, you end up getting a surface that's really nicely finished, almost never has any blemishes. So I like using Minwax polyacrylic. It's a water-based clear finish, usually used on wood. And I'll use that as a sealer for the paint. So I'll do one just over the primer, and then the last one I'm going to paint it with some airbrush paint from Createx. This is pearlized white because all of them are going to have a clown color finish. It's kind of a shimmery yellow and red paint job, and I really like that paint scheme for trout and saltwater, and I really have run out of clown color lures. So they're all going to end up clown color, but in the meantime we're going to do this experiment. And pearlized paint usually takes a couple of coats to really cover well. Now I'm going to do this in several coats, so I'll let it dry between coats. I'll get back to you when this thing's nicely coated. All right, there you go. It's got a nice pearlescence to it. Now I'm going to go ahead and spray this one and the pearlescent one with the polyacrylic. All right, we got a good coating on them, a couple of coats. And while we wait for those to dry, I'm gonna go ahead and mix up some of that 2-part epoxy and go ahead and give this a coating. So one of the things, and it's a small thing, but that I really like about these is that they've got pump spouts. And that just makes it so much nicer to work with. You don't have to worry about dribbling stuff all over everything. You just squeeze what you need into a cup and mix it up. Now this is meant to be mixed 1-to-1. By volume or by weight. So I'm going to go by weight because I don't know that these pumps are like perfectly calibrated. I'll take part A and put a squeeze in there. I think 1 squeeze from each one should be enough to do all 3 lures. So I'm going to mix this up for about 2 minutes. So when you're thinking about whether you want to go with UV cure resin or 2-part resin, this is one of the things you've got to consider. Here I actually have to mix. It's one more step. It means getting a cup dirty, having a stirring stick that you have to clean later or throw out. And I'm gonna brush it on with one of these disposable brushes. I buy these by, I don't know, they sell them a couple of dozen for like $4 at Harbor Freight. Every time you use one of these, you either have to find a way to clean it or just toss it out. So before I put the coating on this thing, I'm gonna go ahead and wipe it down with a little bit of alcohol with a lint-free rag here. and let that evaporate off. And then we'll put a nice light coating on there. This is just a test, of course, but I will be painting over this. So now I can already see that this is not working out. It does not like the surface. You can see it pulling away and fish-eyeing really badly. So this is definitely not something that's gonna work. So I'm a little disappointed, actually a lot disappointed. So I'm gonna go ahead and wipe all this off before it starts to set, and then we'll see if the mid coat on the other ones makes a difference. All right, this is the one with the mid coat, the Minwax polyacrylic as sort of a paint sealer, which for me has worked beautifully for years. So we'll see how this works. It doesn't look like it's doing all that well either. I'm surprised. Usually the polyacrylic is the magic bullet to get the resin to really coat nice and evenly without any blemishes, but I'm not seeing that. So you can clearly see it on this side, how badly it's sort of pulling away from the surface. Almost as bad as the first one. Not quite as bad, but still definitely unacceptable. So I'm gonna wipe this one down too, and we'll go to the next one. All right, last chance for this stuff to actually work. So this would be the typical use, right?
Clear coat over paint and a mid coat, and I haven't touched it.
I shouldn't need to clean it in any way because it shouldn't be fouled at all. So let's go ahead and see what happens. And not this time, I'm not gonna put it all over the body. I'm just gonna put it on the back and see if it looks like it's gonna behave. Then we'll coat the whole thing. All right, and that appears to have done the trick. It's got a nice smooth layer that looks to have like no blemishes. So I'm gonna go ahead and coat the whole thing and probably pass a torch across it a little bit just to get the bubbles out, because this stuff is pretty viscous. I'm gonna put it in the turner just to get it to turn around a bit and see if it levels, see if it develops fish eyes. Hopefully it'll off-gas all the little tiny bubbles that might be in it, and it'll actually look a little better in about 5 minutes. Let's see. It might actually look worse. We'll see. All right, let's do a little bit of a control. This one is the one that did not have the mid coat, the polyacrylic on it, and I wiped it off, cleaned it, and added the polyacrylic. Let's see if the UV Cure resin behaves any better with the surface of this lure, since we're having so much trouble with the other one, with the two-part. So I'm just gonna coat it like I always do. And this is looking much better. Hopefully it stays that way. Sometimes it'll look great when you apply it, and then it wants to start pulling back. And that's looking pretty slick. And I'll have it turning with no UV light on. This way it'll do the same thing. It'll settle out, and it should look a little better, a little smoother in about 5 minutes as well. Let's see how this thing looks. Looks pretty smooth, pretty glossy. I do see a couple of small fish eyes right there, which that's really disappointing. Of course, it hasn't set yet, so I could try to just force a coating on it. The rest looks pretty good, except for those two little spots that were looking a little bit suspect, like they really didn't want to like get totally smooth. All right, there's nothing to do now but to put it back, and it looks pretty good. I don't see anything touching. They're both pretty well situated. I'm gonna go ahead and close it up. And it's been about 20 minutes since I first mixed this stuff, and it's still pretty runny. So even after 20 minutes, you can still coat lures. Another nice thing about the UV resin is that you don't have to throw away or even clean the paintbrush you use. You just have to store it somewhere where it's dark. And what I've done is I stuck it inside of a cigar container. This is an aluminum cigar container. And I drilled out the cap so I could stick the handle of the brush through. And that keeps it clean, and it keeps it from setting up with any kind of UV light. But you know what? Before I give up on this, I've got one more that I forgot I had. And this is just raw resin. Basically, this is straight out of the mold. It was one that I used as an experiment for internal weights. So it wasn't really meant to be finished as a lure. But let's go ahead and see how the two-part epoxy works just on this resin. And like always, I'll wipe it down with a little bit of alcohol, just to be sure I didn't touch it too much and leave a bunch of oil for my hands on it. So I'm gonna give it a quick coating. And the reason I'm doing this is that I'm starting to think that that automotive primer is the culprit here, because this is looking really good, really glassy and well coated. Let's see how good it looks after it's set. And I'm gonna go ahead and just turn on the UV lights. And we'll come back to this thing in like maybe 2 hours and see if they're all set. All right, it's been almost 3 hours. Let's see what we have. Let me just say, don't have any great expectations. This was an experiment. So this is the one that I expected to be pretty nice, and it actually is not so nice. Hopefully you can see it in the light here. It has all kinds of like little wobbly bits, uneven portions. There's a big fisheye right there. This was the one that we painted, then put the polyacrylic on it, and then put the 2-part epoxy on. This would be a real fail if it was a real lure. But I think it probably could use another couple of hours of set time to really get as hard as it's gonna get. I'm gonna have to do some sanding to salvage this lure. This is the one that just had the polyacrylic over the primer, and it actually didn't come out too bad. It has a couple of bad spots. Sometimes these corners where the lure kind of changes shape, sometimes they're a little bit difficult to get a good cover on them. It's definitely not horrible. This is one I can work with. It'll serve as a good undercoat for the paint job. And here's the one that was just raw resin casting with nothing on it. And so this thing, if it were nice, it'd be ready to go. But unfortunately, what usually happens when I clear coat raw epoxy resin is that I get a bunch of really bad fish eyes anywhere where this stuff is off gassing. Even though this has been set for a month, it still doesn't like to have a clear coat on it. So it's pretty haphazard experimentation here, but what can we learn from it? Nothing seems to have changed for the 2-part epoxy. This is the kind of experience I would have almost all the time. Really hit or miss. Sometimes I'd get beautiful gem-like finishes, and other times I'd get gloppy stuff, a lot like this. It really does bring back some really bad memories of my early days trying to get good clear coats and having really nice paint jobs ruined by a gloppy finish like this. And that's why I turned to UV epoxies, because I found they gave me a much more predictable finish, and when something went wrong, could almost always figure out what it was. So as far as the 2-part epoxy, I'm going to call it non-conclusive. I think it's about as good as all 2-part epoxies. They're difficult to predict how well they're going to work, and they tend to be fussy with temperature and humidity. So in Florida, that's a big deal. I'll be sticking to my UV resins. I hope that this helped you guys a little bit thinking about how and what to use for your clear coat, and maybe a little more insight in what UV resins can do and how a good UV light setup can really make your life a lot easier getting a really pretty finish on your lure. Next week, I'll be showing you my latest gizmo. I built a 2-axis mold rotator so I can spin the mold and cast hollow lures. That's going to open up another world of possibilities in maybe soft plastics that are hollow, and certainly hard plastic lures that are hollow, and I can add BBs to it and play with the buoyancy after it's cast and not having to worry about adding micro balloons to play with the buoyancy. So that's going to be a lot of fun. It'll be a lot more experimentation down the road. And as I test this 2-part epoxy as a clear coat more, I'll let you guys know if I come up with a magic formula to get it to work well always. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Leave me a like, and more importantly, leave me some comments below. I really like to hear what your opinions are, what really struck you as interesting in this video, and what you want to see more of. I'm considering building a little micro version of my lure turner with LED lights in it and doing a full tutorial on how to make it. Let me know if that's something you guys would like to see. All right, until the next videos, I'll chat with you guys in the comments.